Sam. Finally.
Finally.
How you doing? I followed your work closely, as you know, and I'm so glad you're here. And you are a non-believer.
Yes.
And I know people are going to kill, oh, Bill, you're always having your non-believer friends on the show. I don't have that many friends who are non-believers. I wish I did. But when I have one, I like to first find out your background, your evolution. How did you get to that place? Because most people are raised religiously. So how did you get where you are? And what advice would you give to kids today who want to break into atheism?
Well, it's, I mean, I started there, and that's kind of the point. Unless
you did?
Yeah, unless you're indoctrinated at some point early on, it's kind of like smoking. You tend not to pick it up later in life. I mean, there are exceptions to that.
As a child, you were an atheist?
Well, I just was not. Atheism has no content. I mean, being an atheist is like being a non-astrologer. You know, no one gets taught to be a non-astrologer. You just don't get convinced by astrology.
So what were your parents?
They were secular. I mean, God was just not talked about in the house.
Oh, lucky you. And in your book, End of Faith, which I love, you don't really use that word.
Yeah, yeah.
So what would you say to people who say, because I hear this all the time, then what do you believe? Well,
I mean, as you say, the irony is I never used the word atheist in this book, which actually touched off this movement's so-called new atheism.
Your book did?
Yeah.
I thought it was me.
Well, we collaborated, no doubt.
Kidding.
I'm sure I stole some of your lines. But the point is that atheism is not a belief system. It is the rejection of a certain style of dogma, and it's the dogmas of religion. And so every Christian is an atheist with respect to Islam. They're not convinced by the claim that the Quran is the perfect word of the creator of the universe. They're not losing any sleep over whether or not to convert to Islam. And an atheist is just someone who goes one God further and just does not accept any of these unsupported claims.
And what do you say to people who say to people like us, you're just being mean? You know, because I hear this all the time, you know, religion, it gives comfort to people. Why don't you let them have that? What is the answer to that, and to convince people that, you know, that comfort comes at a price?
Right, right. Well, there's this idea that religious beliefs can be kept separate, and they don't need to intrude into public policy, into politics, into science. And it's just not true. Insofar as somebody actually believes something, it inevitably shows up in the world. I mean, the beliefs are the means to organize behavior and emotion. And so presidents who really believe that the book of Revelation is a guide to the end times could very well lead us into wars that conform to those bogus blueprints. And we have a Muslim world that is lit up with notions of martyrdom and jihad. And these are beliefs, explicit beliefs about how you get into paradise and what it's worth living for and dying for.
But I can almost hear people out there saying, but that's not me. I'm a religious person, but I don't believe like George Bush did. I mean, there's a story in the press, I'm sure you've seen this recently, that George Bush told Jacques Chirac in 2003 that he was asking his help to go into Iraq because he said the biblical demons named Gog and Magog.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know about these demons, but
well, nobody does, as it turns out.
Well, they're in the book of Ezekiel, and they're in the book of Revelations. But he said they were afoot in the Middle East. You know, what people say, well, that's not me. That's the extremist.
Right. Well, it's not extreme. I mean, the issue there is that that should be horrifying to us, the Gog and Magog story, that those thoughts were rattling around Bush's head. But it should be horrifying but not surprising, because the evangelicals have been telling us for a century what they believe. 70% of evangelicals think that the Bible is a literal word of the creator of the universe and that all of those prophecies are valid.
Yes.
And about 40% of Americans generally believe this. So it's not just a few people believing these things. 80% of Americans think that Jesus literally rose from the dead, will be returning to earth to raise the dead. Francis Collins, who's like the poster boy for sophisticated faith now. I mean, he's not a fundamentalist. He's a scientist who's now running the NIH. He believes
this is Obama's appointment.
Yes.
Let's set the table for people who don't know this story. I know who he is.
Yeah.
Francis Collins. He is a brilliant scientist. You can't deny that. He mapped the human genome.
Yeah. Right? Well, he he is often credited as a brilliant administrator, and he collaborated with 2,500 scientists who, in part, map the human genome. I mean, the problem is that you can be a working scientist and still believe unsupportable religious bullshit because nobody challenges it. I mean, that's.
No, I know but. So, and Obama has appointed him to be the head of the NIH, which is the National Institutes of Health.
Right.
Now, for the person who says, well, so what? He obviously is a scientist who can work in the lab and do scientific work and separate that from his beliefs about the space god Carpenter.
Yeah, but you can't actually separate these things, because if you believe that for instance, as he does, that morality could not possibly have emerged out of evolution, that it can't really have its basis in the brain, but rather had to be inserted by the hand of God at some point when we diverged from apes. I mean, he's written this, he believes this. Then, as someone funding neuroscience research, there's no reason to look for morality in biology, and no reason to fund a study that would explain its emergence out of the brain, which most serious scientists studying morality attempt to do. Your beliefs can't be kept. We have one sphere of reality that we try to represent in our thoughts, and this is why we've founded this foundation called the Reason Project, because we think it's a war of ideas that has to be prosecuted from many levels. You know, your level. I mean, you're on the advisory board, so someone like yourself from the entertainment business, but also scientists like Steven Weinberg and Craig Venter, to novelists like Ian McEwan and Salman Rushdie. We have to come to this from many sides all at once, because this is bigger than atheism. Reason is bigger than atheism. We have a problem of good ideas versus bad ideas, and the real double standard that we're suffering from is that religious bad ideas can't be criticized with any energy.
So answer me the fundamental question that I posed at the beginning of Religulous, which is, how can people like Francis Collins, but he's certainly not the only one.
No.
We're taping a show after this with Bill Moyers. I mean, I have unending respect for Bill Moyers as a brilliant man. He's also a Baptist minister. Jimmy Carter, you know, pretty bright. How do we reconcile someone who is so intelligent but who believes things which you and I think are incredibly childish and nonsensical?
Right.
Do we say that it's a neurological disorder do they have, or do we just say, I'm sorry, however brighter you are in the other field, you're a rube?
Yeah. No, it's a social disorder. It's a conversational disorder. It's the fact that we can't apply enough pressure to these ideas, and it's taboo to do so. And there's this fact that there is a core of truth to religion that we should be interested in. There's the fact that people do have transformative experiences. You know, if Jesus really was who they said he was, or Buddha likewise, it's possible, perhaps, to be the Tiger Woods of compassion. You know, it's possible to really to be someone who has transformed himself, and we should be interested in that, and we should want to actualize that and understand it scientifically. But the problem is that it's so mired in religious mumbo jumbo and superstition and taboo, and religion has seemed to be the only game in town in talking about that possibility, and we have to overcome that.
And we will, with your help. Thank you very much, Sam. We'll talk again soon and more. Sam Harris, everybody. Thank you, Sam. Let's meet our panel. Congress is considering pulling the plug on the James Webb Space Telescope, which is the successor.
Don't get me started.
No, I want to get you started. This is the successor to the Hubble, and they say it can peer into the universe and maybe see the moment when the universe was born. I don't even know how that happens. But it costs $6.8 billion, which, by the way, the same amount that it cost to be in Afghanistan for 1 month. So either way, we're sinking money into a black hole. But they're thinking of pulling the plug on this, and it just says to me, you know, why can't we, and I'm not usually a big supporter of these kind of things, but compared to Afghanistan, compared to the tax cuts for the billionaires,
compared to
it seems like we won't do anything that's for the public good.
Well, first of all, let's clarify what the NASA budget is. Do you realize that the $850 billion, what was it, with the banks?
TARP.
Yes.
Bailout.
The bailout, the bank bailout. That sum of money
Could reach Venus.
That sum of money is greater than the entire 50-year running budget of NASA.
Wow.
And so when someone says we don't have enough money for this space probe, I'm asking, no, it's not that you don't have enough money. It's that the distribution of money that you're spending is warped in some way, that you are removing the only thing that gives people something to dream about tomorrow. Do you remember the 60s? You remember the 60s and 70s? You didn't have to go more than a week before there's an article in Life magazine, the home of tomorrow, the city of tomorrow, transportation of tomorrow. All that ended in the 1970s. After we stopped going to the moon, it all ended. We stopped dreaming. And so I worry that decisions that Congress makes doesn't factor in the consequences of those decisions on tomorrow. Tomorrow's gone.
You know what?
They're playing for tomorrow, metaphoric tomorrow, not the literal tomorrow. They're playing for the quarterly report. They're playing for the next election cycle, and that is mortgaging the actual future of this nation. The rest of the country, the rest of the world is going to just pass us by.
And that's the type of government investment that does have the multiplier effect. I mean, look, you just had a stimulus that didn't include it, and I think there were some management issues too. But you also had the TARP. So my point is that, yes, that's the type of program that we historically have been a capital investment and had a multiplier effect. That's not what we're seeing today, and the reason is that we've, no offense, pissed away so much money in these stimulus packages.
And by the way, there was cost overruns. That's not a,
Right.
And that's bad. But, if there's a cost overrun on anything in this world, should we be surprised it comes about on something that you've never done before? This is a telescope without precedent in its size, in its scale, in how deep into the universe it's going to reach to tell us about the origins of the cosmos and the engineering innovations that need to be brought to bear to make that happen.
Speak it, Rev.
I'm just saying.
I wish Dr. Cornell West was here to, please, Brother Neil.
This is the America I grew up in.
Hallelujah.
And it's the America I want to hand to my kids.
But see, this is what we need, because we need a preacher of science, because like this is the week, I guess is it tomorrow that Rick Perry's
Yes.
Christachella down there in Houston? No, I don't know if you...
Christapalooza.
Right.
Christapalooza.
No, you're going to step on a... Congress is considering pulling the plug on the James Webb Space Telescope, which is the successor.
Don't get me started.
No, I want to get you started. This is the successor to the Hubble, and they say it can peer into the universe and maybe see the moment when the universe was born. I don't even know how that happens. But it costs $6.8 billion.
Well, first of all, let's clarify what the NASA budget is. The bank bailout, that sum of money
Could reach Venus.
That sum of money is greater than the entire 50-year running budget of NASA.
Wow.
And so when someone says we don't have enough money for this space probe, I'm asking, no, it's not that you don't have enough money. It's that the distribution of money that you're spending is warped in some way, that you are removing the only thing that gives people something to dream about tomorrow. Do you remember the 60s? You remember the 60s and 70s? You didn't have to go more than a week before there's an article in Life magazine, the home of tomorrow, the city of tomorrow, transportation of tomorrow. All that ended in the 1970s. After we stopped going to the moon, it all ended. We stopped dreaming. And so I worry that decisions that Congress makes doesn't factor in the consequences of those decisions on tomorrow. Tomorrow's gone.
You know what?
They're playing for tomorrow, metaphoric tomorrow, not the literal tomorrow. They're playing for the quarterly report. They're playing for the next election cycle. And that is mortgaging the actual future of this nation. The rest of the country, the rest of the world is going to just pass us by. You're not concerned about Congress? Well, I checked these numbers. 57% of Senate, 38% of the House cite law as their profession. And when you look at law, law is, well, what happens in the courtroom. It doesn't go to what's right. It goes to who argues best. And there's this urge, the entire profession is founded on who the best arguers are.
Right. It's not, a courtroom is not about the truth. It's about the theory, if I get what you're saying, is that each side argues their version, and then the truth somehow emerges.
That's the premise. However, the practice, which, for example, is bred in debating teams, for example, where you know the subject, but you don't know what side you're going to be put on to argue.
Right.
And so the act of arguing and not agreeing seems to be fundamental to that profession, and Congress is half that profession. And I realized this when I was a kid. I was 12, and I said, oh, I wonder what profession all these senators and congressmen were. Law, businessman, law. And I said, there are no scientists. We're the engineers. Where's the rest of life represented here? And so when I look at the conflicts, the argumentative conflicts, I just sit back and say, you know, can I buy an engineer, please? Or put somebody, a business person who knows how to make a hard but significant financial decision, because at the end of the day, they got to make their books work.
But, you know, I think that is part of it.
I'm screaming, I'm sorry.
It's okay. I like screaming. It's a time to scream.
Very far, only about 100,000 years, and all our ancestors lived in Africa, were African, and walked out of Africa not that long ago. So we are African, actually we're African apes. We're all African apes, and somehow brings us all together, don't you think?
We're apes with a shave.
Yeah, exactly right, yes.
But Christine O'Donnell, who I showed the clip of last week, said that she does not believe in evolution, believes it's a myth, because she said, how come we don't see apes evolving now? Why don't you go to the zoo and see the monkey evolving, you know, before our eyes? I know this is what they call a softball here in America, but for those who don't... You know.
That is spectacularly stupid, and... It's not...
I love the British, the way they can get away with it.
It's not just that it suggests that she thinks that monkeys turn into humans overnight, but it's also the fact that monkeys are very good doing what they do. They live up trees, and it's a very good thing to be a monkey if you're up a tree. You might as well say, why aren't humans turning into monkeys? Because we have a common ancestor with monkeys, which lived about 20 million years ago, and we've both been evolving ever since. That's as simple as that.
And what about throwing the poop?
Well, I've known that to happen, if not in real humans, at least in human cartoons.
But that does seem to suggest that the monkeys are more primitive, more interested.
Well, primitive means more like ancestor. So if we looked at the common ancestor of humans and it's up there, and then we come down. That common ancestor would have looked much more like a monkey than it looks like a human. So we probably would have called it a monkey, yes.
And the people who say evolution, you know, not real because we can't see it, this kind of stuff, in your book, which is marvelous, interesting, even to the layman, which is what I am, the layman, if I could appreciate it, anyone can, because I'm not a science person. You talk about, for example, the fact that lizards, even in our lifetime, were moved to an island, right, where they never were before, and we saw it in just a matter of decades.
That's right. I mean, most of evolution happened before we were born and took much too long for us to see, but there are just a few examples, and these lizards is one. They were moved from one island in the Mediterranean to another, and within a couple of decades, they had evolved a completely new diet, and that had changed their jaws, even changed their stomachs, and they now got stomach valves. In just a couple of decades, just think what could be achieved in 1 million years, 100 million years.
So when people say the Bible is real, what they're really saying is that ancient people somehow have more knowledge of it, somehow more wiser. That's silly, right? Because wisdom develops on the shoulders of other people. I mean, there could be no Einstein without Newton. There could be no, right?
Yeah. And we're not even talking about the ancient Greeks, and we're talking about a tribe of wandering Middle Eastern herdsmen. I mean, why would they have any wisdom about the origin of the world or the origin of anything else? That particular myth is the myth that just by sheer chance, the Judeo-Christian myth, happens to have come to our civilization. There are thousands of myths in the world. None of them are any better than any of the others. Some of them are a lot more poetic than that one.
Right.
But that's all you can say.
And you have a campaign, I know that I saw you speak on YouTube very eloquently about this OUT campaign.
Oh, the OUT campaign. Well, it's even written on the
Right.
T-shirt, which, by the way, you can get from richarddawkins.net. And you also look up...
You're not so evolved that you're above a plug.
I know. Sorry about that. And the OUT campaign is there too. The OUT campaign, it's partly... Sorry about that. And the OUT campaign is there too. The OUT campaign, it's partly come out as an atheist. Don't be afraid to come out. It's not... but we're not in the business of outing people. People may out themselves, and all we do is encourage them. Keep religion out of schools, keep religion out of politics.
I want to hear your answer to the people, because I saw you speak about this, who say, well, you know, atheists are responsible for really all the horrible things that have happened in the last century, because Hitler and Stalin and Mao were all atheists, and look what they did.
Hitler was a Roman Catholic, and even if he wasn't, which he was, even if he wasn't, his soldiers, his foot soldiers, those who actually did the horrible things, were either Catholic or Lutheran, and they had been schooled for centuries to hate Jews. Both Catholics and Lutherans had been trained to believe that Jews were responsible for killing Jesus. So Hitler had a ripe field to plow there in the Christian heritage of Germany.
But could I add something to that? Because I've thought about this, I've been confronted this with myself many times, which is that I think people get hung up on the word religion. Hitlerism, Stalinism, Maoism were state religions.
They were religions, of course.
And Hirohito in Japan was a godlike figure.
Yeah.
The real crux of it is that any time that people give up on logic and put their faith in someone, Kim Jong-il, in North Korea, the mythology around him. They said that the first time he played golf, he had 11 holes in one.
Yes, right, yes.
That's religion.
That's right. And the point is that there is no logical pathway that would lead you from atheism to do those terrible things.
Right.
There is a logical pathway that would lead to that either from a Christian religion or something like that, or from one of these state religions like Nazism, like Stalinism, and so on. You really can justify doing those awful things if you believe something as strongly as religious people do. But nobody's going to go and kill for the sake of atheism. Why on earth would you?
Right. Yeah. In France this week, they passed a law that you cannot wear the burqa. Now, I know you feel, as I do, it doesn't really matter what you wear, but just speak a little about what goes on in the schools of...
Right. I mean, I think, as you imply, there are much worse things than the clothes you wear. A couple of months ago, I visited a British Islamic school, one of the best in the country, and the headmaster was a leading Muslim in Britain. And I spoke to about 6 of the girls. Only the girls and boys are kept strictly separate, of course. And I learned that every single pupil in that school did not believe in evolution. And the pupils that I spoke to quite clearly think that the Quran is a superior source of scientific information than evidence. And they told me, for example, that salt water and fresh water don't mix. The reason? Because it says that in the Quran. Now, alas, I lacked the presence of mind to turn to the teacher sitting next to me and say, will you please, at the very next science lesson, get some salt water, get some fresh water, and mix them and see what happens?
Well...
And my guess is that even if she did that, and sure enough they would mix, they still would believe the Quran, because the Quran takes precedence over fact, evidence.
Whether water is salt or fresh, shit floats. Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you very much.
Please stay around for overtime. Richard Dawkins, everybody, and now we will meet our panel. Thank you.
All right, just a couple of thoughts. One that's sort of deeply cosmic and another one that is fascinatingly disturbing, I think. You'll be the judge of this. Consider a couple of fundamental facts that has been gleaned in the past 60 years. That the ingredients, if you had asked your chemistry teacher 50 years ago, once you looked at that mysterious chart of boxes that sat in front of your class, the periodic table of elements, where did those elements come from? The chemistry teacher would actually not have an answer for you. They'll say, well, you dig them out of the earth. That's not where they come from. It took modern astrophysics to determine the origin of the chemical elements. We observe stars. We know what goes on in their center. They explode, laying bare their contents. And what we have discovered is that the elements of the periodic table, that which we are made of, derive from the actions of stars that have manufactured the elements, exploded, scattered their enriched guts across the galaxy, contaminating or enriching gas clouds that then formed a next generation of stars populated by planets and possibly life. And so, when you look at the ingredients of the universe, the number one ingredient is hydrogen. Next is helium. Next is hydrogen, helium, oxygen, carbon, nitrogen. Those are the top ingredients in the universe. And you say, well, okay, that's kind of cool. Well, and you look at Earth, because we like thinking of ourselves as special, we say, oh, we're special. Well, what are we made of? Well, what's the number one sort of molecule in the body? It's water. It's water. Well, what's water made of? H2O, hydrogen and oxygen. Hydrogen and oxygen. In fact, if you rank the elements in the human body, with the exception of helium, which is chemically inert, useless to you for any reason other than just to inhale it and sound like Mickey Mouse, you can't die from helium unless that's all you breathe. Number one in the human body is hydrogen. Matches the universe. Number two is oxygen. Matches the universe. Number three, carbon. Matches the universe. Number four, nitrogen. Matches the universe. And for each of us, the fifth element, other, is the same in both places. Okay? Other. So, we learned in the last 50 years that, of course, not only do we exist in this universe, it is the universe itself that exists within us. And had we been made of some rare isotope of bismuth, you would have arguments, hey, we're something special. But there are people who are upset by that fact, saying, well, that mean we're not special? Well, I think it's special in another kind of way. Because when you look up at the night sky, it's no longer we're here and that's there. It's that we are part of that. And that association, for me, is actually quite enlightening and ennobling and enriching. In fact, it's almost spiritual, looking up at the night sky and finding a sense of belonging, given what we've learned about the night sky. And so now we have ourselves. Now, are we alone in the universe? We're made of the most common ingredients there are. And our chemistry is based on carbon. Carbon is the most chemically active ingredient in the entire periodic table. If you were to find a chemistry on which to base something really complex called life, you would base it on carbon. Carbon is like the fourth most abundant ingredient in the universe. Isn't that rare? You can make more molecules out of carbon than you can all other kinds of molecules combined. So if we ask ourselves, are we alone in the universe? It would be, in spite of my diatribe about UFOs, I tell you in the same breath that it would be inexcusably egocentric to suggest that we are alone in the cosmos. The chemistry is too rich to declare that. The universe, too vast. There are more stars in the universe than grains of sand in all the beaches of the world. There are more stars in the universe than all the sounds and words ever uttered by all humans who have ever lived. To say we're alone in the universe. No, we haven't found life outside of Earth yet. We're looking, haven't looked very far yet. Galaxies this big, we looked about that far. But we're looking. And how about life on Earth? How is it hard to form? Just because we don't know how to do it in the lab doesn't mean nature had problems. So it may be, given that information, that given the right ingredients, which are everywhere, life may be inevitable, an inevitable consequence of complex chemistry. If that's the case, we look around our own solar system, we look at Mars. All the evidence suggests that Mars was once a wet, fertile place, an oasis. There are dried riverbeds and floodplains and river deltas and meandering rivers. It's all bone dry now. Something bad happened on Mars. Some knobs got turned in its environment that left it the way it is right now. Some bad knobs got turned on Venus, too. Runaway greenhouse effect. You saw the clip on that. 900 degrees Fahrenheit on Venus. Some knobs got turned there, too. People say, why spend money up there when we spend it? Because up there we might learn about down here, okay? I don't want a runaway greenhouse effect here. Venus is the best example in the solar system of a planet gone bad. Let's learn about that first. So, it turns out we learned that asteroid impacts, when they hit, can cast rocks in their surrounding areas into space with escape velocity, so they never come back to the planet from which it was launched. If Mars was wet and fertile before Earth was, as all evidence suggests, and if Mars had life before Earth had life, it is possible for there to have been bacterial stowaways in the nooks and crannies of the rocks that were cast into space. There's some hardy bacteria that we already know exists on Earth. Survives extreme temperatures, pressures, freeze-dried, reconstituted, radiation. The hostile environment of space would be nothing to some of these bacteria. It may be that life on Earth was seeded by bacterial stowaways on rocks that were cast free from Mars. This is a plausible scenario that's called panspermia, the transference of life from one planet to the next. If that's the case, that makes all of us descendants of Martians. I want to alert you in advance. Now, let me give you a disturbing thought. A fascinatingly disturbing thought, and we'll leave you on that note. If you look at our closest genetic relative to human beings, it would be the chimpanzee. We share like 98+% identical DNA. We are smarter than a chimpanzee. So let's invent a measure of intelligence that makes humans unique. Let's say intelligence is your ability to compose poetry, symphonies, do art, math, and science, let's say, okay? Let's make that as the arbitrary definition of intelligence for the moment. Chimps can't do any of that. Yet we share 98, 99% identical DNA, okay? The most brilliant chimp there ever was maybe can do a little bit of sign language. Well, our toddlers can do that. Toddlers. So, here's what concerns me deeply. Deeply. Everything that we are that distinguishes us from chimps emerges from that 1% difference in DNA. It has to, because that's the difference. The Hubble telescope, these that's in that 1%. Maybe everything that we are that is not the chimp is not as smart compared to the chimp as we tell ourselves it is. Maybe the difference between constructing and launching a Hubble telescope and a chimp combining two finger motions as sign language, maybe that difference is not all that great. We tell ourselves it is, just the same way we label our books optical illusions. We tell ourselves it's a lot. Maybe it's almost nothing. How would we decide that? Imagine another life form that's 1% different from us in the direction that we are different from the chimp. Think about that. We got 1% difference and we're building the Hubble telescope. Go another 1%. What are we to they? We would be drooling, blithering idiots in their presence. That's what we would be. They would take Stephen Hawking and roll him in front of their primate researchers and say, well, this one is like the most brilliant among them because he can do sort of astrophysics in his head. Oh, isn't that cute? Little Johnny can do that too. Oh, that's so nice. Oh, in fact, Johnny just did that. Let me get it. It's on the refrigerator door. Here he is. He did it in his elementary school class. Think about how smart they would be. Quantum mechanics would be intuitive to their toddlers. Whole symphonies would be written by their children, and like I said, just put up on the refrigerator door the way our pasta collages are on our refrigerator doors. So the notion that we're going to find some intelligent life and have a conversation with it? When was the last time you stopped to have a conversation with a worm? Or bird? Oh, well, you might have had a conversation, but I don't think you expected an answer, all right? So, we don't have conversations with any other species on Earth with whom we have DNA in common. To believe that some intelligent other species is going to be interested in us enough to have a conversation? They'll look at our Hubble telescope and say, oh, isn't that quaint? Look at what they're doing. So I lay awake at nights wondering whether simply we as a species are simply too stupid to figure out the universe that we're investigating. And maybe we need some other species 1% smarter than we are, for which string theory would be intuitive, for which all the greatest mysteries of the universe, from dark matter, dark energy, the origins of life, and all the frontiers of our thought would be something that they would just self-intuit. I'm jealous of that possibility because I want to be around for those discoveries.
The co-founder and chairman of the Reason Project. I've been wanting to meet this man for a long time. Sam Harris. Sam. Finally. How you doing? I've followed your work closely, as you know, and I'm so glad you're here. And you are a non-believer.
Yes.
And I know people are going to kill, oh, Bill, you're always having your non-believer friends on the show. I don't have that many friends who are non-believers. I wish I did. But when I have one, I like to first find out your background, your evolution. How did you get to that place? Because most people are raised religiously. So how did you get where you are? And what advice would you give to kids today who want to break into atheism?
Well, it's, I mean, I started there, and that's kind of the point. Unless
you did?
Yeah, unless you're indoctrinated at some point early on, it's kind of like smoking. You tend not to pick it up later in life. I mean, there are exceptions to that.
As a child, you were an atheist?
Well, I just was not. Atheism has no content. I mean, being an atheist is like being a non-astrologer. You know, no one gets taught to be a non-astrologer. You just don't get convinced by astrology.
So what were your parents?
They were secular. I mean, God was just not talked about in the house.
Oh, lucky you. And in your book, End of Faith, which I love, you don't really use that word.
Yeah, yeah.
So what would you say to people who say, because I hear this all the time, then what do you believe? Well,
I mean, as you say, the irony is I never used the word atheist in this book, which actually touched off this notions of martyrdom and jihad. And these are beliefs, explicit beliefs about how you get into paradise and what it's worth living for and dying for.
But I can almost hear people out there saying, but that's not me. I'm a religious person, but I don't believe like George Bush did. I mean, there's a story in the press, I'm sure you've seen this recently, that George Bush told Jacques Chirac in 2003 that he was asking his help to go into Iraq because he said the biblical demons named Gog and Magog.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know about these demons, but
Yeah, well, nobody does, it turns out.
Well, they're in the book of Ezekiel and they're in the book of Revelations. But he said they were afoot in the Middle East. You know, what people say, well, that's not me. That's the extremist.
Right. Well, it's not extreme. I mean, the issue of movements, so-called new atheism.
Your book did.
Yeah.
I thought it was me.
Well, we collaborated. No doubt.
Kidding.
I'm sure I stole some of your lines. But the point is that atheism is not a belief system. It is the rejection of a certain
Right.
style of dogma, and it's the dogmas of religion. And so every Christian is an atheist with respect to Islam. They're not convinced by the claim that the Quran is the perfect word of the creator of the universe. They're not losing any sleep over whether or not to convert to Islam. And an atheist is just someone who goes one God further and just does not accept any of these unsupported claims.
And what do you say to people who say to people like us, you're just being mean? You know, because I hear this all the time, you know, religion, it gives comfort to people. Why don't you let them have that? What is the answer to that and to convince people that, you know, that comfort comes at a price?
Right, right. Well, there's this idea that religious beliefs can be kept separate, and they don't need to intrude into public policy, into politics, into science. And it's just not true. Insofar as somebody actually believes something, it inevitably shows up in the world. I mean, the beliefs are the means to organize behavior and emotion. And so presidents who really believe that the book of Revelation is a guide to the end times could very well lead us into wars